Hello, I'm Tom Bailey, and in today's Speaker Stories episode, I'll be getting to know Leanne Spencer, who is the best-selling author of 3 books, a podcast host, a keynote speaker, and is also a Bear Grylls Survival Instructor. So, Leanne, hello, and a very warm welcome to today's episode.
Hi, Tom. Hello to everyone listening.
Thank you so much. And just out of interest, whereabouts are you based in the world?
I am in a quite sunny West Dulwich in South London.
Very nice, and it is very, very sunny. It's probably the warmest March I've ever felt personally. So, yeah, great time of year.
Yeah.
I just want to share a little bit more about you before we do get started. So, Leanne began her career in sales and spent over 15 years working in the City of London before leaving in 2012 to set up an award-winning wellbeing company, where she's now a wellbeing consultant with over 10 years experience in the field of wellbeing and has 13 qualifications in exercise and nutrition. So, Leanne, given that you're a bit of an expert, and it's fair to say on all things wellbeing, and you regularly speak on the topic, I'd love to know if you were a naturally born speaker or were things maybe a little shaky in the beginning for you?
Well, it's interesting hearing that intro, and thank you for that as well. What it doesn't tell you is the, that's sort of the clouds. I could take you into the dirt, as it were. And whilst I have accomplished all of those things, I've also had sort of 10 years of alcoholism, which I overcame when I left the city in 2012. That's an interesting point to start at a huge gloss over a massive event.
Yeah.
But I'd done a lot of presenting in my sales career, so I was quite used to getting up and standing in front of people, but in a very formulaic way and very fact-based as well. One of the big leaps I've had to make in speaking, which we can draw out a little more if you like, is going from delivering facts. The company was set up then; it was formed by a collection of canton banks in Switzerland, etc., to actually telling stories, and that was a huge leap. But to kind of get back to the question, I had lots of experience presenting to groups of anything from 1 to sort of 10 in a sales meeting format. It was when I left the city, started out in wellbeing, which was really driven by the drinking, by the city culture, by deep dissatisfaction in what I was doing. And then I left and started off as a personal trainer, then became a coach, and then more recently, in the last few years, started working with companies. And I've started to realize that the really rewarding stuff comes from stage speaking or public speaking in general. That's where if your real purpose is to convey a message and try and compel others to consider making a change to their well-being or their way of life or their habits, you can do that on a one-to-one basis in a personal training or a coaching capacity. But the way to do it at scale is to get on stages, get in front of cameras, construct a message, make it about a story rather than the ubiquitous 3 top tips for sleep, which people find helpful. But if you can tell a story, it brings it to life. So that was a journey that I made over a period of a few years. And it was a leap for me, as I say, to go from delivering facts and figures to telling stories to bring this to life. I suppose I started doing that in 2016 when I did my TEDx, and they sort of dragged me. Well, I say that they wanted me to start telling more stories, and I did, but they also wanted me to pack it full of statistics and facts to back up what I was saying, which I guess is the TED way. They don't want to put someone on their stage and it starts talking about the effects of dieting on the human psyche. You've got to back that up with data.
Yeah.
So it's definitely been a progression.
Great. And I suppose when you're in the topic of behavior change or mindset, really it's that storytelling for people to really feel the journey and really buy into that change that's required rather than listing a load of facts which they are going to forget 3 days later. So yeah, it's that emotive side of it, isn't it? It's really important.
Well, it's that, but it's also if you want to differentiate yourself, because the speaking world is run like a commercial business. You have to win the business, then you have to go and deliver it. Then you need to try and make sure the impact of it's elongated for as long as possible so people don't forget. Anybody really can get enough polish to stand and deliver a set of statistics. We've seen the government do it for the last 2 years. There's no panache around that, but they're getting the message across. They're conveying the numbers and the data. The difference between doing that and true keynote speaking, I think, is the ability to tell stories in such a way that you grab somebody's attention and they remember it. And I know when I'm giving more factual based stuff, perhaps in a workshop scenario, And then when I'm actually telling a story, I can see the difference. You can feel the difference in the audience
The
interaction. And
energy.
people
Yeah.
will say to you, oh, the story you told about the Arctic Circle, you know, it really made me think of this. That's, I think, the big difference as well.
Yeah, and I guess when you provide a great experience to the audience, that helps you be referred to other keynotes and speaking
Completely.
opportunities,
Yeah.
because people say, Leanne was amazing. I loved her story. I'd love for her to come and talk at our business as well.
Yeah.
Great. So my next question then is around I guess the value of speaking for business owners and people. So the question I always ask is, when you hear the title of this podcast, which is Succeed Through Speaking, what does that make you think of? Do you think that speaking is a really key part of success for business owners or for people in general?
Well, I think it depends on what your goals are. If your goal, as mine is to try and convey messages around well-being to encourage people or give people information on which they can act upon around sleeping a little bit more, or perhaps starting a meditation practice, or doing a little bit more movement throughout the day. If that's the goal and you want to get that message out, speaking is the way to do it. There's that aspect of it. We're all financially motivated to one degree or another. Keynote speaking, if you've got the resources and you've got, you know, the polish and the practice and a great message, you can be paid a great deal of money for that and treated very well when you get there as well. So there's that side of things as well. It's also a great way to sort of to get business referred down. So if you do a keynote speech, you may get a couple of people in the audience that introduce you to their company, but you may also get booked to do another one. You may get booked to do workshops. You may sell books. So from a commercial perspective, it kind of, you're starting at the top with the highest paid stuff, and then you also enjoy what may cascade down. So it depends on what your motivation is. Mine is all of those things. I want to convey a message. I want to be paid for that message. I want to be paid well. And I want to enjoy the sort of the benefits of being referred out and working with different clients with different goals and objectives as well.
Yeah, and I hear people talking about monetizing your message, and I guess, you know, sometimes you don't actually have to be paid to stand up and speak. Like you said, it could be that by speaking in front of a room for 1,000 people who are your ideal prospects or potential future customers, it's a great opportunity to leverage your time and get that message or pitch, you could say, in front of such a big audience in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. So let's think about then back to the very beginning. So what's your earliest memory of having to stand up and deliver a presentation, and how did it go? And maybe what we'll do is we'll go back to the beginning of the well-being journey rather than the sales presentations. What was that first well-being presentation like?
Well, as is often my way, sometimes the first time I do anything is a big event, which most people would say, no, I need to start smaller. But it just so happens that my first opportunity to deliver my keynote for the first time happens to be a big audience. This wasn't a keynote per se, but I was asked, I was in a business accelerator group, and they were running a marketing event where they'd hired out a big venue in the Barbican, filled it with 500 entrepreneurs interested in this accelerator. And they wanted previous alumni to come and talk about the impact it had had. So that was the biggest audience I'd spoken to by some distance.
Yeah.
And I spent weeks dreaming about it at night, rehearsing, dreaming, you know, that I would never be able to remember it all, then waking up feeling, no, I'll be fine. This sort of constant process of internal rehearsal, slight panic, excitement, apprehension, the whole shebang. Anyway, on the day, it went very, very well. I mean, I look back now and I see it and I think, you know, now I could do a lot better than that. But, you know, that was the first one. It went fine. I've never broken down on stage, never not been able to remember what I was going to say. Actually, slightly before that, I went to another event where I had to pitch my business in front of about 100 people and a panel of 4 judges. And I did have a momentary lapse in what I was going to say of forgetfulness. And then all the judges were writing, and then they all looked up at me because there'd been this gap. And it came back and I went on. Speaking has been something that's created a lot of nerves for me.
Yeah.
For me, the trick is to keep it simple. Remember things in groups of 3s. The power of 3 is really good. Although there's a caveat that I'll give you on that in a minute. Know your stuff. I don't do rehearsal to the mirror or I don't click on a Zoom and run a session. But as I'm walking the dog, as I'm walking about, I'm rehearsing different ways I'm going to open, rehearsing different ways I'm going to deliver it. And then I start weaving it into conversations I have with people. Nice. So, you know, if I bump into you on a pavement and you say, how are you? I'm not going to start going into a quick piece of my keynote, but I'll work it in. I'll say, oh, I'm not sleeping well at the moment. But did you know though, sleep, la, la, la. or I'll tell them the story. I'll find some organic way in which it can come up in
Love
conversation.
that.
Boom, you've done a little rehearsal. So that's kind of, and I still do it that way as well.
And that's really important to, I guess, you're practicing without the pressure. So there's so much pressure when you've got a live audience in front of you for the first time. So you get those little bits of practice in. And like you said, it's not just standing in front of the mirror, it's actually being in front of real people and getting those conversations out there. Yeah, it's a great tip. I think
another way, just on that,
yeah.
another way to practice is to set up, is to put your iPhone into a tripod and practice that. I look at some of the first videos and I appreciate that listeners can't see me, but I look so sort of earnest and, you know, really a little bit edgy. It's hysterical. I'm just like, come on, smile, lighten up, you know, deliver it with a bit of, you know, be relaxed. But, you know, it's your first time you're speaking to a camera, which is completely different from speaking to an audience.
Of course.
And I started doing weekly videos. I committed to doing a video a week. We called them the Thrive and Fives. I'm still doing them today. And then we can do it really easy now, but it got me practicing talking to a dot, which is what I do most of now. Talk to a dot on a laptop in a room on my own, possibly with a dog in West Dulwich. And there's a bit of live stuff, but that's still where we're at. And that's great practice as well. It's great practice for virtual. Who knew that was going to become such a big thing? But it's great practice just talking without necessarily getting feedback, because then when you do get the feedback, that can be an added bonus with a live audience.
Yeah, lots of great advice and value there. So just to reflect on some of that, I remember one of the big mistakes that I made when I first started. So I had a big fear of public speaking and I wanted to control everything because I just didn't want anything to go wrong. So my first big presentation, I word for word memorized the whole script, printed out. It's big mistake, I now know. Because ultimately, when you're delivering that, if you get one word wrong, it'll just completely throw you. So I think for anyone listening, when it comes to preparation, don't try and memorize and recite a script. It's much more natural, like you said. It could go in different ways on the day. As long as you've got the flow and the structure and the format, and you've got your key analogies and stories, you really don't need to memorize it word for word, is what I'd say on that.
Definitely not. So when I did TEDx, the coach wanted me to memorize it. And because I was new into speaking, this is about 7 years ago, because it was TED and I give a lot of power to that. I allowed myself to be persuaded to do that. And in the 10-week build-up process, you spend 8 weeks rehearsing in an empty, in the lounge, getting halfway through and going, oh, I've forgotten it. I'll start again. Then the more you do it, the more you slip up. And then and I had many thoughts thinking, I'm just not going to be able to do it. I'm going to have to tell them I can't do it. I can't learn it. It's not going to happen. And then one morning you wake up with about 10 days to go and it's there, it's in. But it is very stressful. And now looking back at that TEDx, I can see the couple times when I thought what's coming next, because my eyes just dropped to the floor and then I lift it back up to the audience because it's come back. I know they probably don't, or a speaker coach might. Incredibly stressful way of doing it. Know your stuff. If it's stories, and this is another reason why it should be stories and not facts and stats. Facts and stats, you can get mixed up. But stories, you can't. If it's your story, it's a personal experience or a story you love that someone else has told you and you've got permission to retell, it can't be, no one can say, well, that's not true. And you can't forget it. It's a story. So you'll relax and you'll tell it in a relaxed way with humor and facial expressions and gestures, and the audience will pick up on that energy and they'll give it back to you, and boom, you're in a great speaking forum.
I love that. So have you got any advice? A lot of people I work with hate being the center of attention. And when that comes to a social setting, being the center of attention sometimes means telling a great story and having that table, I guess, around you, watching and listening. That's very stressful for someone with social anxiety. Have you got any tips around how to get better at telling stories, not on a stage, but actually just in and around social situations?
I mean, I've been doing a lot of practice around telling stories myself. I tell loads of stories in social settings, but not all are suitable for a stage. A lot of them about the good old days. So, I mean, I would just perhaps start with games that center around storytelling, board games or games you've made up. Push yourself into maybe telling a story, just weave it into a conversation somehow. We could weave it in with a stranger you've met in the park. So there's no sort of, you're sounding a bit weird. What are you telling stories for? It's not like you. Start watching speakers who are really good storytellers and see how they do it. Everybody listening to this will be a storyteller. It may be in the written word, or they may just not be aware that they are, but we're all storytellers. That's how we've conveyed information throughout the course of time. So I would just start with a little anecdote or something and just tell it in a setting at some point and get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Also, I think we tend to think that when you're on stage, you are the center of attention. You are the person that everybody is looking at. You are simply a conduit for a story or a message to be got. And what you're trying to do is actually reflect that spotlight onto the audience. It's about them. It's not about you. You are simply telling a story to get them hopefully to an outcome or a decision point. So actually, it's a nice little reframe in your mind to think, this isn't about me. I'm not the center of attention. Those 120 faces, they're the center of attention, because what you've been booked for or what you're on that stage to do actually has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with the action that you want your audience to take. So if you reframe it that way, suddenly the spotlight's gone from you in the heat of the lights to them.
I love that. Yeah. Think about what value can I add to these people in front of me? And that's a great reframe. So,
it's about them. Yeah.
Thanks for that. So we've talked about people who are just starting out, who want to maybe one day become a speaker, and you've given lots of great advice and tips. So what about at the other end? So if somebody really has started speaking and they really want to become a paid keynote speaker that gets booked, what advice would you give to them to pursue that career? So
I went through a speaker accelerator recently, which highlighted a lot of really great stuff. And the key message is it's not about you.
Yeah.
So in your marketing materials, it's about the message. It's about the value the audience will get. That's a huge shift that most people, all of us, need to make to some degree or another. So if you're thinking about getting into speaking with a commercial element to it, then remember every conversation you have or your marketing materials are about the keynote, the value, and what the audience will get from it, or what the booker will get. That's an important thing. So on my website, you go to the homepage, then it's keynote, then it's about me. No, then it's resources and etc. And the about me is actually towards the end. If someone's like, love all this, love the message, what's she all about? So the question was about how to get into keynotes, paid keynote speaking, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Understand your value is the second key part. Most people massively undervalue themselves. Now, I don't suggest you go in at 8 to 10 grand while you're beginning. Go in at a rate that you're comfortable with. And get booked up a few times at that, get the great feedback, get the testimonials, get someone to come and video you on stage. So you've got all that material, bump that price up a little bit. Always going a little bit higher than you think you can justify, because you may have to do a little bit of negotiation, but overvalue yourself slightly. If the marketplace is telling you that we've seen your videos, seen your marketing materials, read your testimonials, we're not paying that, then you may have gone a little bit too high. Most people don't go too high, they go too low. Get comfortable with your value. So ask people for feedback. Have maybe someone come to your gigs, someone that you trust who can give constructive feedback and say, that was amazing, this and this you could work on, and that'll help you to lift your value. So that would be the second point. I suppose the third is equally or more important than any of them, which is make sure you've got a message that people want and need to hear.
Yes.
And make sure you're telling it via stories. And it's something that you believe in, not something that you think is what the market wants at the moment. So I've noticed that one of the reasons why in the intro I say that I've been in wellbeing for 10 years is because I have, and because that's a long period of time. But there were quite a few speakers I've noticed who are attacking wellbeing onto their list of topics now. And they're within their rights to. I don't have a monopoly on wellbeing, and it's not like a chartered surveyor's qualification. If you know a bit about sleep and you've got a bit of a story to tell about wellbeing, you can call yourself a wellbeing speaker.
Yeah.
But it's having that depth in that area that's made a difference for me. So make sure you stay in your lane.
Yes.
Or that I think is really important as well.
Would you say it's important to have quite a tight niche, just because there's a lot of speakers out there, and if you're a marketing speaker, I guess you're up against a lot of other marketing speakers. So is it important to have that tight niche?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is in all aspects of business. And it's something that people feel quite reluctant to do because they want to keep it nice and open. So they get lots of inquiries, but you have a really tight niche. If you can win 10 customers who really want to know about the well-being for the premenopausal over 50-year-old women, then that's there's not going to be a lot of speakers honing in on that.
Yeah.
Then you're more likely to get brought in and asked to speak on that topic. So definitely find a niche, find some different angle as well. So I've got the Agile Business Athlete methodology. which essentially has this look at athletes and the way that they predict what's coming up, prepare, then perform, and ultimately recover afterwards. So there's cadence to the way they do things. So I'm talking about well-being, resilience, sleep, mental health, energy in a different way.
Yeah.
Encouraging people to really think about sort of applying that methodology to their lives. So that's my methodology. It's entirely my IP. Nobody else can legally talk about that in that context.
Yeah.
So that again is a point of difference.
Yeah. And also, you hadn't mentioned it there, but right at the very beginning, you've got your own personal journey and story with well-being, your own challenges you've been through. So being able to bring that in as well, nobody else can have that, because that's your personal story, isn't it?
Yeah. And having said everything about making sure it's about the content and the audience and the value, it absolutely should be, but also be really clear on how you differentiate. So I've got the 10 years in wellbeing, I've got the 13 qualifications in exercise and nutrition. I've got it written there so I can see it all the time, the biohacking experience. So I understand how to use science and technology to improve and change your physiology. Sometimes that's, I bring little bits of that in, but it's a point of difference. And as you say, the corporate background, the experience. So I talk to corporates. I was there in those seats going through those pressures 10 plus years ago. So I kind of understand what it's like to be on that side. I'm not sort of being, and that, for example, sometimes I might be competing against an ex-athlete who's talking about training and then recovering and how you can do that too. And sometimes people will want that. And sometimes they'll think, well, the thing is, the world of athletics doesn't really reflect our world. Whereas I can say, well, I do know that world. And it's not about being better than anyone else. It's about knowing your niche and understanding what the client needs and making sure you position yourself as what the client needs if you genuinely believe that's the case.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, quite a topical question, but given that the 2019 global pandemic pretty much wiped out keynote and stage speaking, how did you personally have to transition during this period?
So I've been doing, for a number of years, I've been talking to a camera, because we were doing these 5 and 5s I told you about. So I wasn't uncomfortable with that element, but I hadn't been talking to a laptop professionally.
No.
So if you look at my first webinar, which I'm not going to give you a link to, so no one will, but I didn't even have the camera on. First one I did, I had the camera off. And I look back now and think, well, what were you thinking? Anyway, so that was and I wasn't that comfortable with talking to a laptop at all. I mean, it's a very unnatural thing to do.
I know.
It's like asking a brickie to talk to a brick or the trowel. It's not a normal thing to do, but practice, you get used to it. And it's, you have to imagine as well, particularly when you're doing keynotes. I did 1 to 500 senior leaders in Asia back in November. I've got I wouldn't even want to look at 500 faces, even if I could on a screen. You get used to talking to the dot at the top, the camera lens. You have to imagine, so you have to know your stuff. You have to imagine that everyone on the other end of that laptop, on their own laptops, is literally there with open mouths, beckoning their spouse to come over and listen to this. Because you've got to imagine that's what they're doing. There's no point thinking, and don't ask for feedback and say, does everyone get that? Because quite often it's broadcast only anyway. There'll be an AV team that are broadcasting it, and you can't ask questions and get feedback from the audience. It's an art. It's a completely new art form aside from stage speaking. And the only way to get comfortable with that is to do it and do it and do it. You could do a Zoom you could do your talk to a small group of friends. One thing I did when I created a new keynote last year is there's a client called DAZN, the boxing streaming service. They run these monthly talks. And I said to them, can I come in and do a talk? It will be, I was honest with my contacts. It's a new keynote. Your guys will get great value. I will charge you a very, very small amount of what their budget is. I never normally speak for that. But will you record it, send it back to me, and will you give me feedback? So they were delighted. They got good value. I got the opportunity to practice in a live audience, because I can't get excited about a fake audience. Just a Zoom and I'm pretending people on the other end. I just can't get up for that. So to build up to it, but it is a separate art form. So anyone who's getting into speaking now will have to have a virtual show reel, in my opinion, and a stage show reel. They'll need to be able to demonstrate that they can do virtual as well. So get practicing that at the same time. And that you can practice your material in a virtual setting, and then you're doing 2 things at once.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point around the finding opportunities to practice. So whether you're new to podcasting, whether you're new to virtual speaking, webinars, or stage speaking, there's always going to be that opportunity to try a smaller version of it, or a less well paid version of it, or a
Yep.
version with feedback. So yeah, there's definitely plenty of opportunities out there. And I speak to people about podcasting occasionally. If you've never podcasted before and you want to, just do your first one. You don't have to actually publish it if it's no good. Just get that practice time in, so that when it comes to the real thing, you'll be a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
Last question, just on that then. Is virtual speaking here to stay? I think you just alluded to that. Or is the world going to bounce straight back to stage speaking in person?
I think stage speaking is coming back. That said, we're still in a pandemic. It sort of doesn't feel like it, and other world events have overtaken a little bit, but we are. I'm being asked to do, I would say, slightly more virtual than I am stage at the moment.
Yeah.
It has its advantages and disadvantages, but I do think it will be here to stay. Yeah. The advantage of not having to fly speakers across the world, the advantage of not having to bring delegates together. Some organizations will opt to keep things virtual. And if you're selling into corporates, a lot of them will not bring people together that routinely. They may do once a year or twice a year, but a lot of things are going to remain virtual. I definitely think so. And I think speakers will need to be able to demonstrate they can do both.
Yeah.
I was told by a speaker bureau a couple of weeks ago, have you got any examples of you doing virtual? I said, I've got a virtual show reel. It's not very exciting because it's me in front of me in front of a camera. But I have. And she said, oh, that's great, because a lot of people are asking for that now.
Brilliant. Good.
So I don't want to overload anyone who's just getting into speaking, but just start talking to your camera. Start telling stories on dog walks, or walks with your friend, or telling little anecdotes, or play a game, tell your funniest story in sub 2 minutes, or something like that. I was going to say something else on that. And that's the other thing that people are talking about, is the hybrid world.
Yes.
And that's something I would discourage anyone from thinking about, because I just don't think you can do those two things well. I was asked to do it last week. I had a client that I know very well. And in the end, I said to them, look, I'm going to do this twice. I'm going to do it once in person, and hardly anyone was there. And I'm going to do it once virtually, and there were a lot more people there, because you just can't, you're either talking to an audience or you're talking to a lens.
Yeah.
But you can't really do both unless you've got a great AV team. And even then, I'd be very reluctant.
Yeah, I understand that, because you've maybe got a camera on the right hand side of the screen. You've got to keep looking at it to try and engage that audience, whilst you've then got a room full of real people. Yeah, perfect. Great. So great insights, great value, great advice. Last question from me today is, if anybody wants to book you as a speaker or find out more about you, where can our listeners connect with you online?
Thanks for asking that. So my website, Leanne Spencer, Leanne Spencer.co.uk. Instagram, I've been dragged into Instagram by my marketing team. So I'm building up that following, but I'm at Leanne Spencer Keynote, and that's the same for Facebook as well.
Perfect. And what I'll do, Leanne, is I'll put those in the show notes so people can click on those and connect with you after this episode.
Awesome.
So Leanne, thank you so much again for your time today. I really appreciate you coming along and also sharing such great value with our audience.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone listening. Thanks to you as well, Tom. Appreciate it.